To say Grace Badamosi and also Alex Petropoulos, who joins us for the very first time. Do you want to move that mic slightly toward? Slightly toward. That was a bit rough. Nice to see you both. How are you?
Nice to see you. Thank you for having us on today.
Oh no, absolute pleasure. You look absolutely fabulous, Grace. You look like you're going out after this.
Thank you.
Are you going out?
No, no, I'm going back to bed after this. Actually.
Oh right.
It's a beautiful day outside.
Yes, absolutely. Right, shall we start with the news that has been breaking overnight? You know, the front page actually of only one paper at the moment. Iran launches swarm of kamikaze drones at Israel. This is Iran launching an unprecedented attack on Israel, unleashing a barrage of missiles, rockets and drones from its own territory and from its proxies across the Middle East. US and British forces reportedly intercepted more than 100 drones after hundreds were launched from Iran in a long-awaited attack after weeks of threats from Tehran. Iranian state television said ballistic missiles have been launched in a joint assault designed to overwhelm Israeli air defences deep in the occupied territories. That's been confirmed by the IDF. The army is urging residents of various parts of Israel to stay near protective spaces. And we also saw these drones and rockets coming from the Iranian proxy groups in Lebanon, Iraq, Syria and Yemen. Now, Grace, we knew this was coming. Joe Biden warning Iran, do not attack Israel, saying the support for Israel is ironclad. A change of kind of language from the United States. The US intelligence was right. It said that there was going to be an attack. The USA said it would stand by them. This is all, and it was, we were talking to Roger Gowolb earlier. I think he put this really well into context. This is also about the attack on Israel. Israel then attacked on the 1st of April. They struck against Iran's consulate in Syria, killing a senior commander of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard called Mohammad Reza Zahidi. And Iran said, look, we are going to respond. We knew it was coming. What do you make of what happened and the fact that Iran itself was involved, which I think took many analysts by surprise?
Yeah, this is firstly an incredibly worrying escalation in the region, and the fact that, as you said, Iran did actually conduct the attacks itself really shows the kind of heightening tensions. I think what we really need to look at is what Israel's response is going to be after the fact, because as you mentioned, they bombed the consulate in Syria. Iran then conducted its sort of response over the night. What we really need to look at is, thankfully, 99% I think of those drones were intercepted, so it now kind of eyes are on Israel to see what its response is going to be, whether that's going to be de-escalating or, you know, sort of going like for like. I think at the end of the day, from what the US has said and from what the UK has done, it seems that the international community is kind of rallying around Israel on this. So
very much so. What's your take on it, Alex?
I'd have to agree with what Grace is saying. I think that, you know, there are lots of people that are pushing for a de-escalation. There are lots of people that are pushing for, that are trying to prevent essentially World War III from happening. And there are a lot of people trying really hard to do that, but there are also some people who are actively working against that. And so I do think that Israel will probably de-escalate. I don't think it has the ability, it doesn't have the space, it doesn't have the bandwidth to open a new front to start responding in that manner.
If it does do that, does it then assume the moral high ground of saying, okay, and in fact those strikes were very targeted, in fact the damage is minimal, and I think Israel, we knew it was coming, but the response has been quite precise. If there had been collateral damage, if people had been killed in that strike, there is no doubt Israel would have responded.
Yeah, and it's all about proportional response, right? Which is, so Israel did its attack on that general, and now Iran does what it sees as a proportional response. And, you know, I think that we have to say that Israel disproportionately responded to the Hamas attack in hindsight. It responded in an excessive manner and killed many civilians. So the track record doesn't look that great there. Maybe it will have learned
to be fair to Israel, 1,200 people were killed. We had all the hostages taken, and Israel then responded. But many people share your view, which is that actually Israel's response has been more in terms of Gaza. And of course, you're seeing all these displaced people in Gaza. The push for the two-state solution. These two parties are miles apart in terms of any mediation, despite all these other countries getting involved. As a young person, though, How concerned are you about, and we talked about Nostradamus actually, how concerned are you this is going to escalate into something resembling a third world war?
Just absolutely terrified. Honestly, absolutely terrified. I mean, firstly, when sort of Ukraine and Russia broke out, we were all talking about energy prices and prices then. If we see a conflict break out in the region, the economic impacts alone are going to be absolutely massive. Now, to talk of the actual conflict, because Iran actually conducted this attack itself, and depending on what Israel's response is going to be, we could very well see a situation where NATO countries like the US, like the UK, are going to get involved in the conflict, and this is going to sort of trickle down into, again, tensions within the UK.
And Alex, for you, as a young person as well, how concerned are you?
I think I share Grace's concern. You know, when Germany invaded Poland and when Japan invaded China, no one thought that would become a world war. No one saw that as for what it would be. And we have to be very careful when these small regional conflicts can blow up into these wider escalations. That being said, like I said before, there are lots of people working really hard to make sure that doesn't happen. I think that we should keep putting our backs behind and our support behind those people. We should keep throwing criticism at people who try to undermine global security, people who want to undermine Western alliances. Lots of people, maybe people who are getting elected in this wave of elections this year, who'd be trying to stoke up nationalist politics.
That's a really interesting point, isn't it, about the fact that we are about to see enormous numbers of elections around the world, and of course destabilisation of the West would be key to that.
Well, I was just wondering, Alex, listen to you, just how does Starmer handle this? Because he already has a problem within his party for the pro-Palestine supporters, the anti-Israel supporters. Now he's going to have to come out, I assume, with all the Western leaders and support Israel.
He has actually already said that he does support them.
So how does that play for him?
You're right, this is a very difficult balancing act that he's going to have to manage. That being said, he's already doing the right things. He's already committed to that 2.5% spending for defence. When that comes is difficult to tell because there are a lot of other problems that the country has to be facing before you can get to fixing defence, and that's a whole, there's so much wrong that you have to really tackle everything from all angles. I think that you can really focusing on this idea that we're just trying to keep peace, we're trying to maintain peace, and that's a consistent message across both Israel defending itself and keeping Palestinian civilians safe.
But the really interesting point about that, and Corbyn and Starmer, of course, Starmer was on Corbyn's side, who obviously didn't want to have any deterrent. Now he's changed completely to saying we need to spend 2.5% of GDP on defence. This is about him trying to look prime ministerial. Meanwhile, we've got the Corbynistas thinking, well, actually, we can amass around this. Is Starmer actually... I mean, do you believe what Starmer says?
Well, firstly, with Israel, I think Starmer's changed his stance about 17 times since the conflict actually broke out. And I don't think anyone can actually trust anything that he says because he's saying one thing today and like next week it'll be something different. And you're right, he does have a really serious issue in the party of people who are wrongly conflating criticism of Israel's conduct in the conflict with somehow supporting the Iranian regime. So I think Starmer definitely is trying to position himself to look somewhat prime ministerial, but I don't think it's working.
Interesting. And of course, Angela Rayner, this bubbles along, and now we've got the latest, the former employee, this is Matt Finnegan, and Angela Rayner is saying, well, this was my primary residence in one of the properties, and then it turns out that it may well be the other one. She registered the children at the other one. She made £48,500. Now, Matt Finnegan says he's in no doubt, a former aide, that a residence Miss Rayner shared with her husband was the family home. So where does this go from here? Does that change things for Starmer? Because he's going to have to decide, does he actually side with Angela Rayner? And he's being very measured in his language. Or does he side with her? Or does he sort of try and distance himself as this unravels?
I think that Starmer has been very correct, and he's actually succeeded a lot in keeping party unity together. That's been his main goal throughout the whole thing. He's kept his party together. He's created this broad tent. I think he's going to stand behind Rayner. I think it's the right thing to do. I think that even if she's, to be honest, even if she's broken the law, this happened before she was an MP.
It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. If she broke electoral law and she's going to be Deputy Prime Minister, you don't think that matters?
I believe in second chances. I believe people can make mistakes.
But this isn't just a second chance, really, is it? I mean, she once called all Tories scum. I mean, she's not...
Well, she attacked Jill Mortimer, for example, in Hartlepool. She called for Akshata Murty to publish her tax returns. So it does rather stink of hypocrisy, doesn't it?
I do think you're right that Starmer is going to stand behind Angela Rayner. I don't think that's the right... honestly.
No,
I think
not.
he will flip-flop, and I think by the end of next week...
That's going to be a hard thing to, like, do in the media.
He does it all the time.
Yeah.
But also, if he flip-flops again, that's a gift to the Conservative Party,
Yeah.
isn't it? Because they're already calling him Captain Flip-Flop. Watch his language. So he doesn't have 100% confidence. He now has full confidence. By next week, he might have a bit of confidence. I'm just not... I just don't know that he'll stick to that.
I think today's
line.
revelation with the aid coming out is going to make him think long and hard now. What do I do? What do I do? And I'm actually not sure he wants Angela Rayner. I think he was always forced to have her.
I agree.
think this might be his opportunity to get rid of her.
But if he gets rid of her, then I think there are more problems brewing, aren't there?
Yeah, I think Angela Rayner was really someone he had to endure in the party to kind of keep certain factions of the Labour Party happy. So if she does end up sort of resigning, either if she's found to have broken the law or if Starmer gets rid of her, it's going to be interesting to see how the party...
So then the question is, Alex, is Rayner an asset for Starmer or a liability?
It's a very good question. I think she's an asset for the people that matter. I think that for these young voices who are maybe feeling a bit disenfranchised by some of the moves that they've seen Keir Starmer make, she's a definite asset. I think that for people who don't care about that, to be honest, I don't think this story is landing. To be honest, I don't think they really give a fuss about this, and I think they're going to be voting Labour regardless. At the end of the day, I think that, so for that one group that cares, an asset. For that one group that doesn't care, whatever.
We shall see. Right, let's take a break. Thank you very much indeed, Alex and Grace, for the moment. Time for a break. We'll continue with our Future Politics panel after this break. Don't go anywhere. This is TalkTV.
Hey, very good morning to you.
Thanks for joining us.
You're with TalkTV, on radio, online.
And we're on your smart speaker.
Now, you ain't going to have an EVIT, me old Chinas, but a new report is calling for a new definition of Cockney.
All right, Jeremy, me old China.
All right,
Rosie,
son.
oi, oi, treacle.
When J.K. Rowling says, let's just be honest, that's all she's saying, let's just be honest. When a man goes out and kills, we should talk about them as what they are, a biological man. Trans woman.
Morning. We're in the middle of Future Politics panel. Grace Badamosi, Alex Petropoulos joining us this morning. Let's move on. I just want to read one out. This is interesting. We were talking about this in the break. If Labour wins the election and the far left are plotting to hijack the Labour Party, as the front page headline suggests, an extreme far left Prime Minister could be a reality and Britain will never recover. I'm aiming that at Alex. Right, let's move on and talk about the ECHR. So obviously we've been talking about the Safety of Rwanda bill. It's coming back. We believe it will go through on Wednesday or Thursday of this week, of course. The Safety of Rwanda bill is interesting because obviously it sets out the criteria and what it says, and obviously we're now in parliamentary ping pong. But Rishi Sunak, the ECHR, there's been another ruling. Rishi Sunak has hit out at the complete overreach of an illegitimate ruling by the European Court of Human Rights that imposes a duty on governments, wait for this, to achieve net zero. Now, this is an intervention from Downing Street, which comes ahead of the Safety of Rwanda bill. And this essentially is the most extraordinary judgment, as far as I can see. So the ECHR ruled the human rights of a group of elderly Swiss women had been violated by the failure of their government to act quickly enough to tackle climate change. Many cabinet ministers completely overwhelmed by that ruling, basically saying, here we go, yet again, a foreign court interfering. Now, I can also share that a man who lost his Norfolk home to North Sea coastal erosion, which happens all the time, by the way, in this country, then is suing the government for not doing enough on global warming based on the ECHR decision. Surely that means we need to leave, doesn't it, Grace?
Well, firstly, I'm an absolute advocate of staying in the ECHR.
I know that.
It was primarily created by Brits, and there's not really anything in it that contradicts British law. Talking on specifically
Well,
net
Steve
zero,
Barclay, the Environment Secretary, said human rights do not start with the ECHR and they do not end with the ECHR.
but there's nothing in the ECHR that contradicts what is in British law. And talking specifically on net zero, again, you know, I'm a big fan of that. This
Hang on a
ruling-
minute. So you've got the ECHR saying basically the government is responsible for getting to net
But
zero,
this has happened
and
in
that
Britain
somehow
already.
stops coastal erosion.
This has happened in Britain already. The UK government has been sued and lost by British advocacy groups who said that the British government is failing in its commitments to net zero that it made.
Who voted
It was
for that?
legally, but
Who voted for net zero?
It's not a thing that you vote for.
Well, why not?
It is.
Because it.
Of course it is, Grace.
Having a concern for the environment and
I'm
saying
concerned about the environment. I don't think this arbitrary target is right.
Firstly, it's not an arbitrary
It
target.
is completely
It's
what is
quite
it-
literally.
what is it based on?
It's based on scientific research.
Have you watched
that
The
says,
Climate the movie?
No.
Perhaps you should.
Okay. Okay, I'll add it to my watching list.
Yes, do.
But in terms of net zero, the UK government has, again, it's nothing to do with ECHR. The UK government has been sued by UK advocacy groups in UK courts and lost.
I am talking about the ECHR finding the Swiss state had breached Article 8 of the ECHR, which guarantees the right to respect for private and family life. Now, it's a binding convention because we're signatories to this, but we've even got a British judge who says, I fear in this judgment the majority has gone beyond what is legitimate and permissible for the court to do. Unfortunately, in doing so, may well have achieved exactly the opposite effect to what was intended. Now, I think that's really pertinent because actually I think this is going to embolden Sunak to say, right, enough is enough, we're out. Alex?
So, yes, I think that might be the case. To be honest, I'm not opposed to leaving the ECHR for the right reason.
See, Grace?
I do think that the Rwanda bill is an absolutely ridiculous and terrible reason
I agree on
to leave. And I think that, honestly, the climate stuff also doesn't really make much sense because, like Grace says, we already have our own domestic laws that cover all of this stuff. The sues happen regardless. You know, if it's stopping the government doing something that would make the country better, leave. But if someone wants to make that case to me, definitely.
So Rennie, can I just ask you? So there's this chap, Kevin Jordan, he's 70. He says he's lost everything after sea erosion saw his home in Hemsby near Great Yarmouth demolished by the local council. And this is because, basically, they're suing the government. But he had a house on, basically, a part of land where we know coastal erosion takes place.
Yes, we are an island. There
And
will
we're an
always be
island.
coastal erosion. That's how the land has been formed. This is like buying a house next to a nightclub and then complaining that you don't like noise, I'm afraid. It's very sad. And I feel sorry for him, of course, for anyone that loses anything. What worries me more here is courts ruling on ideologies, because it is an ideology.
It's not an ideology.
It's an ideology.
It's actually entirely devoid of an opinion. It is very simply the fact saying if we don't take specific action by a specific date.
You know what, Grace?
Okay.
It is an ideology because what's happening here is we're hearing the same sentences that we've heard for trans, that we've heard for COVID, which is 99% of scientists agree with this. Well, actually, if you actually dig a little bit deeper into that kind of statement and look where the money goes, when you're a scientist and all of your funding will only come if you do the right kind of science or the right kind of research, you will go along with the narrative.
Grace is giving you a withering
Yeah,
look.
she might well. We saw it in COVID, we've seen it in trans, we're seeing it again now in climate. You should watch Climate the movie. It's on Netflix. It's been squashed everywhere because it doesn't go with the creativity. Things like special weather events, coastal erosion, rising water. There's lots and lots of science that says that the net zero policy is utter and complete nonsense.
Sorry.
Watch it and then come back
I
to me.
disagree. You will be hard pressed to find any credible scientist
shall I
that
tell you-
actually believes
right,
net zero
Grace,
isn't something
Grace,
that governments need
all
to
of
commit
the
to.
scientists in there was one of them, a Nobel Peace Prize winner in physics for 2 years.
You two can take this outside. Alex, can I just ask you, though, we're now seeing other countries saying, actually, we are thinking of leaving the ECHR, including Switzerland. And obviously this is more a right of centre, it's a right-wing Swiss party, SVP, saying we need to leave the ECHR. This, I think, is overreach. I just want to go back to the point I asked Grace. Who voted for net zero? And when you tell me this is all made in science and these deadlines are set, because, by the way, they changed them, it was 2050, now it's 2035, based on absolutely no more data. But in terms of people's voting, let me just tell you what's going on in my neck of the woods. So essentially, National Grid wants to build pylons and lay cables as part of Norwich, North Norfolk, down to Tilbury in Essex, and essentially no one's been asked about this, to connect wind farms to the grid, marching great big blinking pylons across great...
Tilbury is already quite rude by pylons, actually.
Tilbury is, but what about Norfolk, Suffolk? And obviously I'm speaking because I'm a NIMBY and I don't want pylons in my backyard. I want to know, shouldn't we have a referendum on net zero? No pylons.
So I'm actually going to disagree with you for the reason...
I'm not surprised.
But for a reason you might not expect. I actually agree with you that net zero is a bit silly and setting this arbitrary target.
Arbitrary.
But I do think we need substantial climate action. I do think we need to do things like building pylons. So what matters isn't setting these arbitrary targets and then saying, I don't care how you get. No, because this is important, because we don't have a way to get there. Theresa May said, this is how we're going to stop all climate emissions by this date, but then didn't set out a plan to actually get there. And the problem is that this allows politicians to shield themselves from actually doing something about the problem. You know, it's cheaper to build a wind farm, it's cheaper to build a solar farm in the country than it is to build a gas power plant. But we're not allowed to build it because the planning regulations say that if one person objects to your onshore wind farm, it's blocked. If one person objects to your grid connector,
it's also if one person
blocked.
objects to you fracking, it's blocked. That goes both ways.
We should reform both, honestly.
Okay.
We should just have lots more energy production throughout the whole country.
I agree.
Yes, I agree with that.
And also, I think that's a really important point, which is about the arbitrary targets, Grace. This is 120 miles. What the government says, we have been very clear on targets for connecting large amounts of offshore wind. If we pause it, we would miss our target. It's a made-up target.
It's not a made-up target. It's like I don't understand this idea that it's a made-up target.
Because they made it up.
We set a deadline saying that if we don't.
So they made it up.
Okay, so
Right.
I say if I don't leave for my train by 8, I'm missing my train. That's not an arbitrary target. The train is leaving whether I'm on it
Rubbish
or not.
example.
The same way that regardless of whether we, build onshore and offshore wind farms, there is going to be a point where climate change is irreversible.
So Chris in Newbury
target.
says
Okay.
Grace proves net zero is a religion because she hasn't read
How is
anything.
it a religion?
Hang on a minute,
Oh,
hasn't read
okay.
anything that contradicts the opinion of the believers.
Okay.
Is she too afraid it might dent her belief system if she sees evidence that?
Can I ask you one
to
question?
the
Do you
contrary?
believe that carbon dioxide is causing the weather to change?
Carbon dioxide is somewhat damaging to the environment.
Is it?
yes.
Do you know what levels
Trees
of carbon
like it.
dioxide we are at now compared with 40,000 years ago, compared to the temperature?
Off the top of my head, no.
Why don't you know this data when you're arguing so hard for it?
Because I don't need to know specific data
I know the
points about
data because
specific...
I'm arguing against it.
Please tell me.
Okay,
Please
so
tell
we
me.
were in an ice age, but we had 2,000 parts per million, but now we've only got 400 and our temperatures are rising.
At the end of the day, we can all see, whether you agree with me or not, we can all see how
Can
climate
we?
change is
But I
irreversibly
can't,
damaging our
Grace, because
natural
I'm looking
environment.
at the data.
I'm looking outside. I'm looking at the fact that my children, my children's children, won't be able to have a secure
Do you think
future.
I don't love my children?
That's literally
Right, okay.
not what I'm saying.
Ooh, you're on fire this morning, Doctor. Alex, just in terms of where we go from here, and look, I also want to move to a greener, more sustainable future. It's
Yes, that's right.
It's just, I mean, I drive an electric car, for example, but I don't want to do it and actually hamper the progress of this country. And that's why, actually, I think fracking is part of the solution. I think nuclear, we should have built nuclear power stations many, many years ago. We talked about it 20, 25 years ago. We just didn't do it.
Yeah, I agree. I think we need to build all of that. And I think that, like we said, getting a bit lost in when we're going to get there gets us lost to how we're going to get there. I think that, to be honest, a lot of climate politics comes down to vibes more than actual... comes down to vibes. And, that commenter said it was a religion. He's right insofar as that, it is vibes-based. It is, do people feel like they're doing the right thing for the environment when actually there might be... If you look at the actual figures, there might be things that actually work better for the environment.
Very quickly, I'm just going to read you a comment here. Good morning, doctors. Great show as always. These young people haven't got a clue about net zero and climate change. I feel so sorry for them. They have a lot to learn. Francis and Arundel, thank you very much. Indeed, let me just ask you very quickly, if I may. I think time is quite tight. I want to talk about missed appointments in the health service because a lot of missed appointments. I was just looking. We had 124 million outpatient appointments across the NHS in England last year. 8 million DNAs, that means do not attend. And this costs the NHS about 1.2 billion quid every single year. If you miss your appointment, should we fine you?
Do you know what? I'm actually not against this. I feel like if you can prove you had a valid reason for missing your appointment, absolutely, the fine should be waived. But the NHS is already on its knees, as we all know, and its resources are being stretched far beyond its capability. So if we can put a financial incentive for people to, not skip these appointments that other people desperately need. I'm all for it.
Is the problem, Alex, that we don't have a sense of value because it's free, which it isn't, it's free at the point of need, and so people just think, well, I'm not going to turn up.
It is right that making a fine would make people show up more, and I think that it's definitely one thing you can do. I think it should be done alongside lots of other reforms. I think there's a big danger of if you just grab onto this one thing, say this is my silver bullet, I'm just going to make people pay. It could be a slippery slope. It could end up with lots of bad things happening. At the end of the day, we have to have a conversation about our NHS and say, look, things will have to change. Things will have to maybe get a bit worse in some parts in order for the system as the whole to get better. We can't stick to this ideological...
Yeah.
I think we all agree. I think we all agree. Very quickly, if I may, there is a billionaire who has a plan to bring Titanic back to life. This has been rumbling on for a long time. This is Clive Palmer. He loved the movie of Titanic. I just wonder if he recreates Titanic, which essentially would be 56,000 tonnes, it would be wider, it would have modern safety standards, it would also have lifeboats and everything.
And it wouldn't hit an iceberg?
It wouldn't hit an iceberg. Is that in bad taste? I mean, I've always been fascinated by Titanic. Is it in bad taste?
I just think it's a bit of an odd thing to do, I'll be honest. I think if you're a billionaire, clearly you've got a bit of spare cash lying around. I personally wouldn't be sort of recreating a mass grave, but if it works for you, I guess.
He could maybe feed the children in Yemen that are suffering from famine.
Or the children in this country suffering from hardship. What do you think?
I think it's very important for people to do cool and weird things.
So I totally agree.
I think that the world needs more people doing weird, and honestly, it sometimes comes to billionaires to do weird things.
The boys are talking.
That other people wouldn't do, and I think society benefits from
I
it.
totally agree. I think this is a rational, very intelligent conversation as opposed to what was going on over there. Thank you very much to both of you, to Grace Badamosi, Alex Petropoulos. Thank you very much.